Well, I mean, and the truth is that you get to a song that maybe you don't care for the music part of it, but it's all back to that unwrap the package thing. You know, it may not be the song that I would love to turn on the stereo really loud in the car and go drive in the countryside, but you know, you got to listen to what they're saying, and you got to listen to those words and find out if there's something that somebody is expressing in worship that you've never been able to express before. And go, wow, I like that, and I can say that, and I can mean that, whether I'm writing it, or I'm singing it, or I'm praying it, or I'm just mirroring it somehow. You know, it's the idea of somebody else has gotten something. You know, have you ever gotten anything in your worship that you thought God had just given to you? Have you had that experience? Isn't that cool? I have a bunch of stuff in my worship that as many times as I sit down to do worship that I think I'm not going to do that because I don't want it to get old and I don't want it to become meaningless. It's become something that I believe, a group of things that I believe God has put into my heart and allowed me to be able to say that I mean, that always make it authentic for me. So if you get those individual things, then hang on to them and be grateful for those and use those, because that's what makes your connection and makes it authentic. All right? So don't lose sight of that. Worship's got to be important. Okay. Last week, we started with the first phrase of the first verse of the 23rd Psalm. And we dug kind of deeply into that because we really wanted to try to come away with a better perspective, a different understanding of what David was trying to communicate when he said those words, "The Lord is my shepherd." So we talked about this one who wants to be our shepherd, or supposedly wants to be our shepherd, and we asked a few questions. You know, the first one was, who is he? And hopefully what we got was a new appreciation, a new perspective, some understanding of the Trinity, the why God is the way he is and does what he does. And then we examined some of his qualifications. We looked at his integrity, his character, his abilities, and his capabilities. We discovered how God truly sees us in the fact that we were created, we were specifically put together to be the object of God's affection and his attention and his obsession. And then we learned that all sheep bear the mark of whatever their specific shepherd is. Everything that I have, everything that I am, for the remainder of my days, just so you are glorified. This is the mark that we must bear if we are to be one of God's sheep, and he is to be our shepherd. So this week what we're going to do is look at the second half of that, the last part of that phrase, which is just 4 words. I shall not want. And I hope that you are going to be as completely blown away by how much meaning there is in just 4 words. Okay, so let's start. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. What kind of a posture, a picture do you get when you hear it that way? Is it a directive? I shall not want. Does it come across as an impression of a command that you're supposed to follow? Is this a redirecting of your attention? Is this some sort of an order that's supposed to enforce some boundary? The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. If you hear it this way, it might be time to look at your attitude toward and your perception of who God is in the role that you allow him to assume into your life. I'm not sure that this is what David had in mind when he wrote it. So let's try another one. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want. It kind of sounds like something that I've heard somewhere else. It's almost like an assurance that's not quite 100%. We're not completely convinced that it's going to happen. I shall not want. It's almost like an academic profession. An understanding that God is capable of accomplishing our needs, but not always capable of believing that it's going to happen. This is what we call fake it till you make it. It's a little closer than the first one, I'd say, but this is still going to fall short of the perspective of somebody who supposedly believes that they were made as the object of God's affection and attention, right? Okay, let's try another one. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. Now, this is a little different. This is a little closer because this leaves us with an impression of a much deeper sustenance, of being sustained, right? This sounds like an intentional resolution, right? This goes way beyond the first one, which was, I shall not want. This goes beyond that resolution or that commitment that says, I've got to get away from all of my selfishness and I've got to redirect my energies away from the subjective desires of my heart. All right? And it goes and it lives in a completely different zip code than our academic, our only head-filled, not heartfelt profession, our belief that God is certainly capable of addressing our needs, but we're seemingly lacking the ability to always believe that He will. Now you see, this third one is different. This third one should redefine your expectations, because this kind of satisfaction, this kind of comfort and contentedness cannot even entertain the thought of spending any energy to pursue anything outside of the current status and situation. It sounds more like, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not have to want. What want? I've got grass. I'm good. Can you hear the difference between the three? And I shall not want. I shall not want. I shall not want. Sounds more like the little engine that could, right? I think I can. I think I can. I shall not want. And the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I think it's this last one that David was experiencing when he wrote the 23rd Psalm. Because David certainly understood what it was like to have physical and material needs, didn't he? He knew what it was like to be pursued and to be hounded by Saul and his forces. He knew what it was like to live in and out of caves, foraging for whatever resources and whatever food he could find. David knew intense privation, deep personal poverty. He knew what acute hardship, and he knew what anguish of spirit was in an up-close and personal way. But David chose to live his life in an obedient way instead of inventorying all the things that he aspired to have. He was running for a really long time in and out of caves. This was after he was already anointed to be the king of Israel. But what we never find through the entire accounting of David's life, through the entire section in 1 Samuel, we never hear David whining about the stuff that he was entitled to have as a result of being anointed. God said, you, go hide in that cave over there. So that's what he did. It's ridiculous for us to make this assumption that if we're going to be one of the sheep of the Good Shepherd, that we're never going to experience need. Look at Philippians 4:19. It says, and my God will supply all your needs according to His riches in glory in Christ. Look, God is going to supply your needs, not eliminate the inevitability of them. A confident sense of contentedness is the byproduct of a sheep who is dependent upon the shepherd in such a way that even in the middle of great need, there is never a doubt about the shepherd's awareness of our need. It's in this relinquishing, it's in this dependence that we find ourselves capable of adopting this attitude of complete reliance, because there's never a doubt of His capability to address our need and His willingness to address it in the absolute best way possible. It's in this environment of safety that an obedient sheep does what it does best. It stays as close as possible within arm's reach of the shepherd. It continues to do what it's already been told to do until the shepherd calls or directs for it to go in a different direction. Some mistakenly make an assumption that if a person is prospering materially, that this is a significant mark of God's blessing on their life. And listen, this is faulty thinking. Do you know why? Because all kinds of people prosper, don't they? All kinds. The definition of one's prosperity is determined through the method by which it was obtained. Did you get that? Listen. The definition of somebody's prosperity is determined through the method by which it was obtained. What does that mean? That means, is your prosperity the result of your focus, or is it the reward for your obedience? Let's see if I can make this a little more clear. Look at Matthew 5:45. For he, God, causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Look, all kinds of people prosper. Some have amassed such fortunes that subsequent generations have still not even been able to wipe out all of those resources. Prosperity is not an automatic indicator of righteousness, and a lacking is not an automatic indicator of spiritual deficit. Does that make sense? So just because somebody's got a lot doesn't mean God's blessing them, and somebody who doesn't have much, that God doesn't care and isn't paying attention. Look at Revelation 3:17. Because you say, I'm rich, I've become wealthy, and need nothing, and you don't know that you're wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked, I advise you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so that you may be rich, white clothes so that you may be dressed and your shameful nakedness not be exposed, and ointment for your eyes so that you may see. Listen, the people at the church of Laodicea, they're getting the ultimate smackdown right here from the angel. Because not only had they not become either hot or cold about their faith, they had become prosperous and decided that because they were prosperous, everything was okay with God. And God was using the angel saying, I got different news for you. He said, because you have this attitude, let me just see if I can get your attention and tell you, you better be looking at some different priorities. At the end of it, he said, so that you'd have ointment to spread on your eyes so you can see. Look, the people were prosperous because this is where they had focused. And since they had attained what they were seeking, they automatically made this assumption that they could just cruise through in their relationship with God. On the other side, we have Deuteronomy 8, verses 1 to 20, that tell us that God undeniably makes this clear, that if we will choose obedience first, then God will bless us and protect us and guide us. He will keep our enemies from us, and He will keep us healthy. That was God's promise. Look at Matthew 5:6. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will be filled. That word filled is a Greek word in the New Testament that is kortazo. It's used 15 times throughout the New Testament. And listen, 14 of the 15 times that it's used to mean full, be filled, or satisfied. Now, why is that important? If you read the verse with that meaning behind it, what does it say? It says, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will be, what? Satisfied. When you're satisfied, do you have any wants? You don't, right? Because satisfied means I don't want anything, I'm satisfied. So that says, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will not have any wants. They will be satisfied. Adrian Rogers said this. He said, happiness is something you stumble over on your way to serving Jesus. When you're serving the Lord Jesus Christ, happiness is the byproduct of righteousness. People who are trying to be happy are focusing on the wrong target. If you focus on righteousness, if you'll seek after righteousness, then you will become happy. Prosperity doctrine people, they always focus on the financial aspects of God's definition for prosperity, and their logic misses the truth by a mile. It's missing. It makes as little sense as if you inherited a Major League Baseball team, okay? You now own it. And you say, well, since I own it now, guess what? I am going to be the bat boy because I want to be close to the players in the field. And you've completely missed having the ability to enjoy the privilege of being the owner of the team. Talk about missing the woods for the trees, right? Listen, as we're being obedient to God, that means as we're submitting and we're responding to the things that God asks us to do, God promises to prosper us, meaning security, protection, blessing, guidance for our families, our flocks, and our freedom. Those who focus on prosperity will fail in the area of obedience. But those who focus on obedience will never fail to prosper. The full definition, no matter what is happening in their lives. Look at John 16:33. He said, I've told you these things so that in me you may have perfect peace and confidence. In the world you have tribulation and trial and distress and frustrations. But be of good cheer. Take courage. Be confident. I have overcome the world. I've deprived of its power to hurt you, and I've conquered it for you. Okay, so what does this have to do with how I started the message? I started with, I shall not want, right? There's something to be learned about the definition that best fits you, the one to which you relate the most when you hear those four words, I shall not want. Does your heart reflect the first one? The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. Is it that directive? Is it that you hear? Or is it the second one? I shall not want. I shall not want. Are you still faking it till you're making it? Are you still believing God's capable but can't quite get there and believe that He's going to? Or is the third one what you hear? When you hear, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. The way your heart responds to those four words, I shall not want, is indicative of your submission and your obedience. And listen to this, it will define your prosperity. Whatever your prosperity is it because that was the focus of your efforts, or because it was the reward for your obedience? Jesus made it very clear to the rich young ruler who said he wanted to be a follower. Look at Mark 10:21 and 22. He said, then, looking at him, Jesus loved him. And he said to him, you lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And then come and follow me. But he was stunned at this demand, and he went away grieving because he had many possessions. Listen, everybody has to choose the shepherd that they're going to follow. And Jesus went to a lot of trouble to point out to those who might choose to follow him that, listen, you cannot serve two masters. I have moved among men and women of all different walks of life. I spent a majority of my life in a huge range of environments. From the confines of a small cubicle in a booth like a Veal, making outbound telemarketing calls, to the deck of one of the largest, longest-serving warships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. I have sold fire extinguishers and photo albums door to door. I have scraped bodies up off the ground from crime scenes and auto accidents. I have taught English as a second language to Korean nationals. I've driven ambulances. And I've given investment advice as a financial advisor to the wealthiest of the wealthy from Newport Beach, California to Manhattan, New York. I have friends who have ascended to the heights of business success. And I have friends who spent a majority of their lives behind penitentiary walls and razor wire. And there is one thing, without exception, there is one fact that remains equal through these varying ranks. It is the master in a person's life that is the difference in their destiny. Phillip Keller said this, He said, among the wealthy and affluent, despite their dazzling outward show of success and their prestige, many remain poor in spirit, shriveled in soul, unhappy in life. They are joyless people held in the iron grip and heartless ownership of the wrong master. By way of contrast, I have numerous friends among the relatively poor, people who have known hardship, disaster, and struggle to stay afloat financially, but because they belong to Christ and have recognized Him as their Lord and Master of their lives, the owner and manager, they are permeated by a deep, quiet, settled peace that is beautiful to behold. It is indeed a delight to visit some of these humble homes where men and women are rich in spirit, generous in heart, and large in soul. They radiate a serene confidence and a quiet joy that surmounts all of the tragedies in their time. They are under God's care and they know it. They have entrusted Christ's control and they found contentment. Contentment will be the fingerprints, the identifying characteristics of a man or a woman who has submitted his or her life to the control of God. Listen, this is especially true in the 21st century. We have a paradox today that lies in the discontent among those people who are always searching for security. Despite unparalleled wealth in material assets, they are unbelievably insecure and unsure of themselves, and they're always feeling like they're looking through the peephole in the door at bankruptcy, financial, emotional, or spiritual. There's something that seems to be this law that was written into human DNA where we seek security outside of ourselves. But the problem is, if we don't have an authentic, reciprocal relationship with Jesus Christ, then people are restless and unsettled. They're covetous. They're greedy for more. They want this and they want that, and yet no matter how much they get, they never seem to be satisfied in spirit. Their focus remains on the perpetually and the inevitably elusive comfort and security, satisfaction in possessions or accomplishments. They're wasting their lives trying to apply a concept that's already been disproven. By contrast, the submitted follower of Christ will stand confidently and quietly and say, "The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want." I find myself completely and absolutely satisfied with the management of the shepherd of my life. Do you know why? Let me tell you about the shepherd. He is the one for whom there is no trouble that is too great while He watches over my life. He is the one that loves this sheep for my sake as much as for His own personal pleasure. He has promised to provide everything for every detail of my life. And this guy, this shepherd, is very jealous for his name and for the high reputation that he has as being the good shepherd. He is the owner who is not encumbered by his flock, but he delights in them. There is no greater reward, there is no deeper sense of satisfaction than when he looks at one of his own sheep and he sees them content, well-fed, secure, and flourishing under his care. This is his very life. He gives everything he has. He lays out himself for the ones that he calls his own. It is this selfless shepherd who is alert. He is alert to the welfare of his flock. He seeks every day to be constantly connected to those that want to be under his care. Even at night, he's aware of every detail and of every need. If we call him our shepherd, it's because we first call him Lord. Lord meaning master. Do you get this? Look at Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills, and where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will never slumber or sleep. If he is your shepherd, the Lord watches over you. If he is your shepherd, the Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. If he is your shepherd, the Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. If the Lord is your shepherd, he will watch over your coming and going both now and forevermore. In spite of having such a master and owner, many Christians today are not content to be under his control. They always seem to have some sort of dissatisfaction, always thinking the grass has got to be greener beyond the fence. Phillip Keller wrote in his book about people like this. He called them fence crawlers. These are Christians who want the best of both worlds. They're not satisfied to stay in their own pasture. They want the satisfaction of the care. They want the protection. They want the blessing, but they don't want to be submitted, and they don't want to be obedient. He spoke of a sheep that he had once, that he said, his words, typified this sort of person. He said, everything about this particular ewe, all right, E-W-E, the ewe, was absolutely perfect. He says, everything about her physical composition was perfect. Her fleece was a coat of perfection. He said she would bear these young that were sturdy, and they would mature very rapidly. He said, but in spite of all of these attributes, she was restless and discontented. She was a fence crawler. He said this ewe produced more trouble than all of the entire flock combined. He said it didn't matter where they were. It didn't matter what pasture they were in. He said she would run the fence line the entire time, looking for a hole that she could crawl through to get to the other side just to eat. He called her Miss Gadabout. He said it's not like she was lacking good pasture. He says, I spent immense time, effort, and money to make sure my pastures were perfection for grazing. He said it didn't matter. He said she was never satisfied. Many times, he said, after she would wrangle herself through some hole, she would find herself feeding on this bare, brown, burnt-out pasturage that was the most inferior. She never learned her lesson. He said it wasn't just that this was her habit, but it didn't take long before her lambs started to follow her. And it wasn't long after that that the rest of the flock started to do the same, going through the same holes, covering the same dangerous paths. After one summer of taking all that he could, Keller said, I came to the conclusion that in order to save the rest of the flock, she had to go. And it broke his heart. He said, because I loved that sheep, just like I loved all the others. And the fact that she was so perfect made it even harder. But one summer day, he said, I took the butchering knife and I put an end to her fence-crawling career. It was the only solution to the dilemma. I'm going to read some verses out of Romans. And it's going to seem a little odd, but I want you to stay with me because then I'm going to tell you why this is important. Romans 1, verses 18 to 23, and then I'm going to skip a little bit and go 28 to 32. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, been understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images to look like mortal men, birds, animals, and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over to their sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies to one another. Furthermore, since they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. For they've become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They're gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They're senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Although they know God's righteous decree, and those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do those very things, but approve of those who practice them. Miss Gadabout was a sheep who, in spite of all her shepherd did to give her the very best care, wanted something else. She was not among those who'd say, "The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want." I'm a firm believer in the idea that we don't need to announce to everyone our allegiances. Our actions and our words will prove it. If the Lord is your shepherd, it will be obvious to those around you how courage and how contentedness are revealed during your life through your struggles. If the Lord is your shepherd and you're not in want, then your relationship with Jesus Christ will be deeply rooted, and it will be thriving because of your following and obeying His leadership. If the Lord is your shepherd and you're not in want, then you will be as contented in His silence as you are in His guidance. If the Lord is your shepherd and you're not in want, then your identification with your shepherd, the manager of your life, will be less of a statement you have to make and will become more evident to those around you by the lack of want in your life, your submission, and the fact that you just follow. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. How do those words echo in your heart when you hear them? Father, we come before you and we stop just to exalt your name, to recognize how beyond our comprehension how great you are. We thank you for what you've shown us in just the first verse of this psalm, the truth about you, about the shepherd that you are, the shepherd that you want to be, in how we are viewed by you, the shepherd, how much you want to be a part of our lives. And now, this stuff about our choice, how we perceive the wants in our life, how our prosperity is defined by how we have obtained it. God, I ask that you would allow us to soak on this stuff this week and not just let it blow by and to go past us, but to really look at this and go, how do I look at that verse? How do I hear that? If I can get to the place where I believe that you're my shepherd, what's my position and what's my perception about my wanting? Am I content to just follow you? And having not heard anything else, to just stay there and continue doing what you've asked me to do until you ask me to do something else? God, I ask that you would just let people go back over this week. That you would speak to them, to their hearts, and allow them to see the truth inside of themselves about how do they function? Do they want? If there's want in their lives, is it because there's a lack of a pursuit of righteousness? God, I don't know where this fits into everyone, but I ask that you would allow this to sink into our hearts, to not go away, to become something that we look at every single day. We thank you for how well you take care of us, how you bless us, how you see us. We ask that you'd help us to begin to understand that better. That we would allow your perspective of how much you love us, how you created us, how we are the object, the focus of your attention, your affection, and your obsession, that we would allow that to sink into our hearts and change the way we operate. We ask all these things so that you are glorified, and we ask in the name of Jesus Christ.